honor to invite our next speaker, the She Shakti, the Nari Shakti. Because of her, we all are sitting here today. So none other than Dr. Dhruvi Hasnani, the brain behind the Practical Diabetology Conference. And honestly, I've seen her CV. Her CV consists of 10 pages. I don't know how to cover in this 5 lines. So great academician, a wonderful researcher, full of awards and rewards. Recently, she was awarded by Ms. Namita Thapar as well. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Sachiri. Thank you. Thank you to our entire audience. And I am so overwhelmed to see such a support. Seeing all of you since the morning sitting in the hall to talk about academics. It's a tough task to bring everyone on the same place on a Sunday morning. So with that, I really wish to thank you all for your kind support all through these 2 days. So I'm here to talk to you all about management of hyperglycemia in hospital settings. So it was in 2016 wherein a workforce of the RSSDI stalwarts got together and we formulated the guidelines for in-hospital hyperglycemia, which is quite a burning issue. To everyone who's sitting in the audiences, it is quite pertinent that we understand that hyperglycemia has posed itself as one of the major complications in mortality as well as morbidity, including the longevity of stay, which I'll just show you. It was way back in the early 1900s when a nurse by the name of Vandenberg, she found out that, if there is a certain level of sugars in people who were hospitalized in the intensive care unit, their stay was certain number versus somebody with a good glycemic control. Their stay was lesser and limited in comparison to somebody with uncontrolled sugars. So she came out and she told her consultants that, why don't we do a study? And then there was an intensive care versus the conventional care study, which came out in the late 1960s. Up till then, the proper management of in-hospital people and in-hospital hyperglycemia was not defined. We talk about hyperglycemia in the hospitalized patients because it impacts their outcomes, it impacts their mortality, their inpatient complications, it impacts the length of the stay and overall hospital cost. We in India, we are an out-of-pocket, country. And for us, even a single day increase in their stay is burning a hole larger than the expected size for somebody, paying for their loved ones in the hospital. Now, if you look at what costs are calculated by insurance-driven companies, we still don't have data, Komal ma'am, in India with the epidemiology of the health economic outcomes of in-hospital hyperglycemia. But in the insurance-driven companies, they are saying that 50% of the cost is increased because of this in-hospital hyperglycemia, which is not managed well. Now, does it impact the outcomes or not? And let's just quickly look at the studies. As the number of sugar levels increases, so does the mortality in the ICU increase as well. 2 folds when it is below 200, 3 folds when it is between 200 to 300, and if it is above 300, the chances of mortality are 4 times higher in comparison to somebody whose sugars are below 200. It is an independent marker of mortality between somebody who has normal glycemia, somebody with known diabetes, and somebody with newly diagnosed hyperglycemia. So we can conclude and say that somebody with newly diagnosed hyperglycemia at the time of admission, their chances of mortality in the ICU are much higher. So how do we divide this in this hyperglycemia? There is something which is previously known history of diabetes. We divide it and classify it as new hyperglycemia and normoglycemia. There is something also known as stress hyperglycemia, and we'll come to it. People in the ICU setting versus the non-ICU setting also, the new onset hyperglycemia in particular is linked to the highest rate of in-hospital mortality. We have amongst us the president of the IPA, the Indian Podiatric Association, Suri sir, and I think sir will agree that from a surgical background also, hyperglycemia impacts the wound healing, impacts the overall length of the stay of somebody, hospitalized for the diabetic foot concern. Can we ignore this hyperglycemia? And that's a total no, unanimous, and that shouldn't be a question as well for everybody sitting on this side and treating hyperglycemia very actively. Manoj sir at HCG, we all will never ever ignore that any level of hyperglycemia needs urgent and immediate attention of a format that you need to actively intervene. Even the guidelines talk about it. There are various different protocols which talk about optimal glycemic control. And let us define this optimal glycemic control also in the coming couple of minutes. We require a team approach. It is not a single-handed job of just the diabetologist or just the intensivist. It requires a team of educators, a team of public health sector people, a team of people who are calling themselves counselors, nutritionists, as well as, the in-team, in-hospital nursing staff. What are the numbers? How do we define it? Now, a previously diagnosed case of diabetes is an existing diabetes. It could be any HbA1c, but the person is on active treatment for diabetes. Previously undiagnosed, first time detected, at the time of admission, the fasting could be more than 126. The random sugar more than 200, A1C undeniably above 6.5. Stress hyperglycemia is something that people have it only at the time when that person is hospitalized, admitted at that point of time. These people will have a good HbA1c in the non-diabetic range, but their random sugars, their fasting or their random sugars will be in the range of either impaired fasting glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, or their randoms will be somewhere around 200. These are the dicey people. These are the people where A1C matters. These are the people where repeated monitoring will be mattering. But these are also the people who at the time of discharge from the hospital, they'll become non-diabetic. This in-hospital hyperglycemia needs intervention, and how should we be intervening? Is it going to actively reduce any sort of morbidity and complication? There is so much of evidence that is present on the internet. We can, always look up at Perplexity, ChatGPT, and we'll come to know that a lot of meta-analysis talks about, again, intensive insulin therapy in critically ill people, wherein insulin is beneficial. Keeping the glycemic numbers between 140 to 180 is your answer and is your number to go. So these are our glycemic goals. Very quickly, let's just look at the second column over here. Critically ill patients, keep the sugars between 140 to 180. Make sure that you put the people on IV insulin infusion. Manage the insulin rate as such that there is monitoring of RBS at every 2 hours. For non-critically ill, again, you can keep a little stringent numbers that the fasting or the preprandial could be lesser than 140, but still make sure that the rest of the time in the postprandial range, the number is between 140 to 180. This time, for a non-critically ill person, the insulin could be a basal bolus insulin. Make sure that that nutritionist involved in a non-critically ill person knows how to moderate the food intake at that point of time. Make sure that she knows correction dose and carb counting. And we have a nutrition workshop also going on in the other hall. These are all the instances wherein we recommend that proper protocols in the hospital be followed in ICU, in non-critically ill people, and also there are special circumstances. We had a special topic for Dr. Bhavesh Patel, who unfortunately couldn't come because of the demise of his grandmother, but he was going to talk about renal cases, steroid-induced, perioperative situation, CKD, transplant, but all of these are special situations again wherein all of us need to make sure that these are the people staying in the range again. We are in the era of time and range, and let us make sure that the sugars of our people with diabetes in the hospital setting also stays between 140 to 180. So that's about the glycemic target. Once again, for an ICU setup, maintain 140 to 180. Non-critically ill patients, fasting could be 80 to 120, but rest of the time, remember the numbers 140 to 180. What should be the therapy? Again, undeniably, insulin is the therapy for anybody hospitalized in the ICU. For the non-critically ill patient, it could be still subcutaneous insulin. Again, make sure the nutritionist, the nurses, the team involved knows carb counting, correction dose, bolusing, and prandial insulin titration. Insulin is the standard of care. Let us not dispute that. A lot of, again, protocol exists, but what I want to talk to you about is the sliding scale. It is not recommended. It is obsolete. Anybody writing a sliding scale is damaging the person with diabetes, damaging his or her own practice. The idea is to always be proactive rather than reactive. A sliding scale is a reactive mechanism that you do. A proactive basal and bolus treatment is what is always recommended. This is the trial that is giving us the evidence of basal bolus of a proactive regimen versus the sliding scale. It's by the name of the RABBIT-2 trial. And you can absolutely see the days of therapy of sliding scale versus the basal bolus from the time of admission. Of course, basal bolus, the people on basal bolus therapy have better outcomes, lesser stay in the hospital. So that is what we are always trying to achieve, a proactive management for people with hyperglycemia. The sliding scale only gave a higher mortality chance. It only prolonged the stay. It only added to the cost of that person. And that regimen resulted in higher rates of not just hyperglycemia, but higher rates of hypos as well, which should not be happening when that person is under constant care of an entire team taking care of that person with diabetes. Basal bolus regimen is what we, just for our students sitting in the audience, basal insulin is something that is 24 hours acting in your body. Like sir already showed, the degludec part of the co-formulation is working for 24 to 36 hours. That is the basal component. And then there is a bolus component for every food intake, for every carb intake inside the body. Could be breakfast, lunch, dinner. Could be breakfast, lunch, mid-evening snacks and dinner as well, along with some correction dose. How do you discharge this patient now? You have taken care of the patient with a basal bolus therapy. You've given a good control. Now your patient is okay, but how do you discharge that patient? So if the person's A1C was less than 7 at the time of admission, you can give either the OADs that were initially prescribed to that patient with small dose of insulin, which can be down titrated at the next follow-up. If the A1C is between 7 to 9, again, you can give small amount of OADs, but make sure that that patient is still on once daily dose of insulin, basal insulin preferably, but you can down titrate the dosage of that insulin at that point of time to say 50 to 80%. Ideally, what the practice is that we still give the basal insulin in the dose that is done in the, that is required in the hospital for 24 hours basal requirement, and then you give some OADs, call the patient after 5 to 10 days for follow-up with SMBG. With proper sugar monitoring, ambulatory blood sugar monitoring is what is recommended. If the person's A1C was more than 9%, still basal bolus therapy is the answer. Continue that with some reduction in the dosage. You can add some level of DPP-4 or metformin, which is tolerable if the patient is stable. Again, SMBG and the role of monitoring is ultimate over here. Whenever you're planning to discharge, always keep in mind that that person is now going to start eating almost in the routine level. There will be a lot of glycemic variability that needs to be followed. What you have to take from this slide is again the stress hyperglycemia part. Follow these people up much more strictly. These could be the patient who might land up with hyperglycemia, pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes again. For people who are already diagnosed with diabetes, whatever the HbA1c number, they are going to take care of themselves. But somebody with stress hyperglycemia might say, you know, that it's gone off and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So this is the clinical practice recommendation by the RSSDI. This was the task force. I was very honored to be a part of this task force along with a lot of stalwarts. So let me conclude to my audience today that hyperglycemia is quite common in the hospitalized patients as well, more common than we can imagine, and we encounter that on our day-to-day basis. You have to achieve a normal glucose or say a number which is 140 to 180 for better outcomes of our people. Insulin is a very, very powerful agent. Use it optimally, use it appropriately in the basal bolus regimen. Sliding scale is obsolete again, and the entire task force led by a lot of doctors over here has been talking about it. The entire RSSDI panel has been talking about it. Aggressive treatment will improve the ICU outcomes. Cardiac events can be, prevented. Cardiac surgery outcomes can be better managed when insulin is given optimally in an optimal dose. Individualized targets are what are recommended at the time of discharge. That person needs to be educated well, counseled well. Dr. Nimi said, a very entire educative panel yesterday about why that is important. Sick day rules, what should they be doing at the time if they fall sick again? What are the lifestyle modifications? A nutritionist role, again, very important at the time of discharge. Role of a physiotherapist, very important at the time of discharge. That all comes as a part of diabetes education. So that's my summary slide, but make sure that they know when to follow up again with you. Without that patient is lost again, your entire regimen, entire hard work that you did in the hospitalized setting is gone away again. You have to educate when to come back to you. So with that, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dubey. Wonderful talk as usual. Insulinization for India is a whole day thing. We cannot cover it in 3-4 lectures, because we also have to talk about insulin injection technique, insulin storage, transportation, sick day rule. Many things is to be discussed and taught and learned. One important thing is sliding scale has been in our genetics. If we want to change it, we have to go back to our med school, and from that MBBS and MD students, we have to train them that sliding scale is not an ideal way of treating, and then we can take it out from our genetics. Otherwise, this mutation will stay with us forever. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhruvi.
Thank you.
Now over to you once again for the next session.
Thank you so much.
And Dr. Komal want to add something.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just have one food for thought. So basically, when we are, because I'm sitting at this side of the table as well, when we are talking about policy makers and how system look at all of these things, we have ample of evidence. Somehow when we are trying to formulate program, policy, recommendation, we don't get that on paper. So I could see that forest plot, meta-analysis and rest of the original articles, none of them were Indian.
No.
So I urge all the clinicians, and being from a research end as well as from a policy and a program person, two recommendations. So all of us could start small documentation of our observations, findings. So we do a lot of roundtable meetings for all of this, but somehow then we end up having expert opinions which does not translate into good reports. So students and I think seasoned clinicians, we can start documenting in the form of reports or publication. That would be really useful for generating contextual evidence. And I think second thing should be my activity. You can park it under my name. From the next time onwards, maybe we can bring those policy makers when this kind of sessions are placed. So they also understand like what kind of repercussion would have if we don't have our own cost data. If we don't have our own morbidity, mortality data just because of this simple management strategies. So I think this is very important because we were using Sri Lankan data.
Yeah.
So we had utility ratio and we had our cost effectiveness ratio only from all other LMICs. We don't have Indian data set. PGI has just started formulating it for some packages which goes into those MA and all other PMJY Yojana, but we absolutely buy that thing. We should be doing and working towards that. So thank you. And this conference, we get this insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do see the passion. We have that equal fervor for coming out with research papers. But trust me, ma'am, at the end of the day, when we complete our OPDs and our hospital visits at 8, 9 o'clock, the bed's the best thing that we have, and I'm sure a lot of us would agree. We do need a lot of collaborative work for that part, and I think we should get a lot of collaboration out of our audiences today. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to all our chairpersons.